When Martin Luther King stood up to address the March on Washington 50 years ago today, his prepared speech did not include the words, "I have a dream." He'd used that phrase before, but his advisors wanted something new. And then singer Mahalia Jackson called out from the audience, "Tell them about the dream." And Dr. King ad-libbed the words that still resonate today. Two teenage girls from Arkansas traveled to Washington that day, and today they came back to watch as an African-American president address the nation. ABC's Byron Pitts talks to them about what has changed and what has not.
With songs and symbols from the struggle, a new generation of the faithful.
And we thank Almighty God for giving us a Martin Luther King. We thank Almighty God that brought us a long way. He brought us from disgrace to amazing grace.
The famous.
He challenged us to see how we all are more alike than we are different.
The powerful stood before the Lincoln Memorial.
The March on Washington teaches us that we are not trapped by the mistakes of history, that we are masters of our fate. But it also teaches us that the promise of this nation will only be kept when we work together.
The numbers were much smaller, an estimated 30,000, compared to the record 250,000 who gathered 50 years ago for one of the most important speeches in American history.
We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating for whites only.
50 years ago, fearful of the potential blowback, most politicians stayed away. Not this time.
Martin Luther King urged his crowd not to drink from the cup of bitterness, but to reach across the racial divide. Because, he said, we cannot walk alone. Their destiny is tied up with our destiny. Their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom.
And I think we all know how Dr. King would have reacted to have more than 835,000 African American men in prison, 5 times as many as when I left office, and with 1/3 of all African American males being destined to be in prison in their lifetimes.
The stories of ordinary people like Sarah Davidson and Diana Watson-Ezell, raised in Arkansas, who this time were welcomed to Washington like stars.
In 1963, the two of you came here as Negro girls,
that is
16
correct.
and 15.
That is correct.
Today you come back 50 years later as?
Professional black women who have made a difference in America since 1963, made some very positive difference. She's a retired school teacher. I've done research, I've done lots of volunteer work.
I came here as a young girl, never leaving Arkansas before, being exposed to this city and the monuments here, and it moved me up. It took away some of the feelings I felt because Dr. Martin Luther King told us to think positive and to go home and help our families and our communities, and we did that.
In 1963, they rode a bus from Arkansas. This time, many of their friends, the children and grandchildren of friends, make that same trip.
All of those pioneers that sacrificed their lives and made it to where we could be where we are today, and now it seems like that is slipping away from us, and we need to recapture that.
Coming from all different walks of life to represent the cause and just to fight for justice.
I would say this: if you can't take a bus ride for justice, then you don't deserve it. Right. So I'll ride there 3 or 4 times if I have to, just to get justice for our people.
Exactly.
God, being here, God, thank you for this trip.
The bus broke down on the way, but nothing could break their resolve to get here, where Sarah and Diana were waiting to welcome them.
It took you 50 years to get here, huh?
Sure did.
Sure
did. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
Emotionally, where are you today compared to 50 years ago?
Emotionally, 50 years ago, I was sad and angry. Sad because living in Arkansas and being treated as a second-class citizen was not a very good feeling. I was angry when I came here And emotionally, when I heard Dr. King's speech, I left with a different type of feeling because he had a dream and a vision.
50 years ago, as 10th graders, they endured far worse than a bad bus ride. They survived the worst of segregation.
My first interest came 10 years old when I saw the Little Rock Nine. I went to Little Rock, and there were National Guards walking all around the streets, and it was scary and very upsetting for a 10-year-old. And I just began to notice things and look at the colored bathroom and the white bathroom, having to travel on the Greyhound bus.
Did you feel less than?
Yes, I did. Yes, I did.
And few people know that feeling better than Georgia Congressman John Lewis, a sharecropper's son from Alabama who suffered beatings and arrests in the 60s, and as he puts it, stood in segregation's way.
We must say, wake up, America.
At the 63 march, he spoke with fire. Today, he spoke with context.
50 years later, we can ride anywhere we want to ride. We can stay where we want to stay. Those signs that said white and colored are gone. The scars and stains of racism still remain deeply embedded in American society. Whether it is stop and frisk in New York or injustice in the Trayvon Martin case in Florida. The mass incarceration of millions of American immigrants hiding in fear in the shadow of our society, unemployment, homelessness, poverty, hunger, or the renewed struggle for voting rights. So I said to each one of us today, we must never ever give up. We must never ever give in. We must keep the faith and keep our eyes on the prize.
In 1961, Lewis was 23, King 34.
And you were still a kid.
I grew up when you have been sitting on a lunch counter stool and someone walk up and spit on you, or pour hot water or hot coffee on you, and you said you're committed to nonviolence. You had to grow up. To go on the freedom rides. In 1961, the same year that President Barack Obama was born, and to be beaten, you had to grow up. So by the time of the March on Washington, I was 23, but I was an older person.
An old soul, as they say.
I was old soul.
Wednesday in Washington, the old souls stood with the young. The words of Dr. King is relevant now as they were 50 years ago.
We have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now. Now is the time to make real the promises of democracy.
We might not face the same dangers of 1963, but the fierce urgency of now remains. We may never duplicate the swelling crowds and dazzling procession of that day so long ago. No one can match King's brilliance, but the same flame that lit the heart of all who are willing to take a first step for justice, I know that flame remains.
For two friends from Arkansas, much has changed in America since 1963. Like the country they love, a little grayer, perhaps wiser, and still moving towards the dream. For Nightline, I'm Byron Pitts in Washington.